благостоянии святых Божьих церквей и соединении всех, Господу помолимся. Господи, помилуй. О святем храме сем и с верою, благоговением и страхом Божиим входящих вонь, Господу помолимся. Господи, помилуй. О великом Господине и Отце нашим святейшим Патриарсе Кирилле, честнем пресвитерстве во Христе диаконстве, о всем причте и людях, Господу помолимся. Господи, помилуй. О богохранимой стране нашей российской и православных людях ее, в Отечестве России несущих и о спасении их, о стране сей, властях и воинстве ее, Господу помолимся.
Letter 6. Contradiction. Quocumque ferrar, everywhere straight. The truth is announced to creation. Note, I use the word creation, quote unquote, to render tvar, creatures taken singly or as an aggregate. Creation, tvar, is not used here in the sense of the creation, sotvorenie, of the world, or in the sense of the world as God's creation, tvorenie. The truth is announced to creation by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth. Here, when the consciousness rises above the double bound of space and time, quote unquote, and enters into eternity here, at this moment of Annunciation, the one who announces the truth and the truth announced coincide completely. In the appearance of the Spirit of truth that is in the light of Tabor, of course the mountain upon which the transfiguration of Christ occurred, see Matthew 17, which the author notes is traditionally believed to be Tabor. On this mountain Jesus was transfigured in the presence of the 3 disciples he had taken up there. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. Second verse. The light of Tabor has thus come to designate phenomena of supernatural light, that, for example, the visible radiance surrounding saints. See the section on Saint Seraphim in Florensky's text. Above. Now, many Christian mystics, notably Simeon the New Theologian and Gregory Polymaths, have, we should say saints, this is like scholarly outside reading or writing, or translation, I should say, not writing. Many Christian saints, notably Simeon the New Theologian and Gregory Polymaths, have written about supernatural reality manifested as light, a light that is physical and non-physical at the same time. Gregory Polymaths writes of the supernatural ability to see God granted to us by the presence of the Holy Spirit in us. Quote, as this faculty has no other means of acting, having quitted all other beings, it becomes itself nothing but light, and grows like that which it sees. It unites with it without mixture, being light. If it looks at itself, it sees the light. If it looks at the object of its vision, that again is light. And if it looks at the means it employs in seeing, that too is light. It is there that there is union, all that is one, so that he who sees can distinguish neither the means nor the end nor the essence, but is only conscious of being light and of seeing a light distinct from any created thing. It's a Meyendorff quote. So, in the light of Tabor, the form and content of the truth are one, but perceived and assimilated by creation, the knowledge of the truth falls into time and into space, into the time of the diversity of the individual, into the space of the diversity of the social. This doubly breaks the immediate unity of form and content, and knowledge of the truth becomes knowledge about the truth, and knowledge about the truth is truth. Small t. Excuse me. It is indisputable that truth necessarily exists alongside the capital T truth, if creation exists alongside God. Forgive me. Should have muted that. Allergies. The existence of truth is only another expression of the very fact of the existence of creation as such, that is, as existing as an individual diversity in time and as a social diversity in space. The presence of truth is equal to the presence of creation. But does creation itself exist? The crux of the matter is that philosophically, an a priori answer cannot be given to this question. Creation is creation, precisely because it is not an absolutely necessary being, and because, consequently, the existence of creation can be derived neither from the idea of the truth, capital T, this prime mover of all understanding, nor even from the fact of the existence of the truth, capital T, from God. Contrary to Spinoza's cosmism and the pantheism of the majority of thinkers, nothing can be concluded about the existence of the world from the nature of God. For the act of world creation, whether we understand it as instantaneous or attainable in history, as gradual and spread over all of historical time, as being revealed in an infinite temporal process, or finally as eternal. This act must certainly be conceived as free, that is, as proceeding from God without necessity. I repeat, the existence of creation, that is, of our infirmity, is not deducible by any arguments, even the most sensible, even the most subtle. And if thinkers still attempt to deduce the existence of creation, then one can affirm in advance that they are either performing a trick of logic or destroying the God-given creatureliness of creation, lowering it. A person free, although infirm, from the level of godlike and creative being to the plane of abstract being in the capacity of an attribute or mode of divinity. Thus, the being of truth is not deducible from, but only demonstrable in experience. In life experience, we come to know both our godlikeness and our infirmity. Only life experience reveals to us our personhood and our spiritual freedom. Philosophy does not have the power to deduce the fact of truth. But if this fact is already given to philosophy, it is philosophy's business to inquire into the properties, makeup, and nature of human truth, that is, of truth that is given by God, but in mankind and to mankind. In other words, the question of the formal makeup of truth, of its rational structure, is legitimate, whereas its content is the capital T truth itself. Or, it is also appropriate to ask ourselves, how does divine truth appear to human rationality? In order to answer the question of the logical structure of truth, it is necessary to keep in mind the fact that truth is truth precisely about the truth, capital T, not about something else. In other words, truth finds itself in some sort of correspondence with the capital T, truth. The form of truth is capable of holding its content, the truth, capital T, only when in some way, if only symbolically, it has something from the truth. In other words, truth must necessarily be an emblem of some fundamental property of the truth. Or finally, being here and now, truth must be a symbol of eternity. Even though it is given in creation, truth must be a monogram of divinity. This worldly, it must in some sense be not this worldly, with colors of the conditional, it must paint the unconditional. The fragile vessel of human words must contain the ever indestructible adamant of divinity. Creation is tossed and turned in the turbulent surges of time, but truth must abide. Creation is born and dies, and generation is succeeded by generation, but truth must be immortal. People argue with one another and contradict one another, but truth must be above argument and contradiction. People's opinions vary from country to country and from year to year, but truth is everywhere and always the same, equal to itself. In a word, truth is, quote, what everyone has everywhere and always believed, because, as the very meaning of the word shows, only that is really and properly universal, which encompasses everything to the extent possible. It gives that in Latin. And this requirement can be fulfilled only under the condition that we follow universality, antiquity, consensus. Every truth must be an unconditional formula. But how is that possible? How is it possible to construct the unconditional formula of divine truth from the conditional material of the human mind? Wait a second here. Let's see. quoting in Latin there. I should know. But I don't. Oh. Let's see. Note 206. Vincent of Laurent, Commonitorium 1, chapter 2, PL, volume 50. Let's see. Which is talking about Kant's universality and necessity of judgments as the sign of their objective scientific significance is probably nothing else but a vestige, quote-unquote, of the ecclesiastical understanding of Catholicity, that is, of povsemistvenoi, the universal, according to the translation of Metropolitan Philaret of Moscow. Letter 8 to Bishop Ignatius Bryanchaninov from 1912. But how is that possible? Every truth must be an unconditional formula. How is it possible to construct the unconditional formula of divine truth from the conditional material of the human mind? Knowledge is given in the form of a certain judgment, that is, as the synthesis of a certain subject, S, and a certain predicate, P. This excludes neither an analytic judgment nor even an identical judgment. For in these judgments, too, the subject and predicate are different in some sense. They must first be distinguished in order, then to be united. But if every judgment is the synthesis of a certain duality, then why could there not be another synthesis, the synthesis of a given subject S with another predicate, with P? Further, why could S not be united with the negation of P with not P? It is clear that every judgment is conditional, that is, it can encounter an objection to itself in the form of another opposite judgment, and even in the form of a contradictory judgment. And if hitherto such an objection has not yet arisen, this in no wise assures the irrevocability of our judgment in the future or in other places. Life is infinitely fuller than rational definitions, and therefore no formula can encompass all the fullness of life. No one formula, therefore, can replace life itself in its creativity, in its creation of the new every moment and everywhere. Hence, rational definitions are always and everywhere subject, and inevitably will be subject, to objections. Objections to a formula are also formulas, counter-propositions. They proceed from aspects of life that are complementary to the aspect in question, that are contrary and even contradictory to the formula that is being disputed. A rational formula can be above the attacks of life if and only if it gathers all of life into itself, with all of life's diversity and all of its present and possible future contradictions. A rational formula can be true if and only if it foresees, so to speak, all objections to itself and answers them. But to foresee all objections, it is necessary to take not them concretely, but their limit. It follows that truth is a judgment that also contains the limit of all its refutations, or in other words, that truth is a self-contradictory judgment. From the formal point of view, the unconditionality of truth is expressed precisely in the fact that it in advance presupposes and accepts its own negation and answers the doubt concerning its truthfulness by accepting this doubt into itself and even in its limit. Therefore, truth is truth precisely because it is not afraid of any objections, and it is not afraid of them because it itself says more against itself than any negation can say. But truth combines this its self-negation with affirmation. For rationality, truth is contradiction, and this contradiction becomes explicit as soon as truth acquires a verbal formulation. Each of the contradictory propositions is contained in a judgment of truth, and therefore the presence of each of them is provable with an equal degree of persuasiveness. With necessity, the thesis and the antithesis together form the expression of truth. In other words, truth is an antinomy, and it cannot fail to be such. So the full spectrum and all the shades of gray in between. And the truth cannot be anything else, for one can affirm in advance that knowledge of the truth demands spiritual life, and therefore is an ascesis. But the ascesis of rationality is belief, that is, self-renunciation. The act of the self-renunciation of rationality is an expression of antinomy. Indeed, only an antinomy can be believed. Every non-antinomic judgment is merely accepted or merely rejected by rationality, for such a judgment does not surpass the boundary of rationality's egoistical isolation. If truth were non-antinomic, then rationality, always revolving in its proper sphere, would not have a fulcrum, would not see extra-rational objects, and therefore would not be induced to begin the ascesis of belief. That fulcrum is dogma. With dogma begins our salvation, for only dogma, being antinomic, does not constrain our freedom and allows voluntary belief or wicked unbelief. For it is impossible to compel one to believe, just as it is impossible to compel one not to believe. According to St. Augustine, no one believes except voluntarily. Nemo credit nisi volens. Everything said heretofore has been said for the sake of simplicity, under the assumption that in logic we take judgments as our point of departure. Truth then turns out to be an antinomy of judgments. But it is not difficult to see that, from another point of view, that is, in the logic of concepts, we would arrive at a similar conclusion, namely that truth is an antinomy of concepts. Of course, both conclusions are actually the same conclusion, for an antinomy of concepts is only psychologically different from an antinomy of judgments. For every concept is transformable into a corresponding judgment, and vice versa. From the logical point of view, certain elements of two conjugate kinds exist in general in rationality, and these elements are mutually transformable and therefore mutually replaceable in arguments, so that they have the same formal theory. But now not this, but only the antinomic connection of certain elements in truth is important for us. Truth is an antinomy. This important conclusion of our reflections requires a more rigorous expression. In other words, what is needed is a formal logical theory of antinomy. Let us indicate a convenient way to obtain such a theory. It is based on the symbolic logic algorithm, which is highly convenient for the concise transcription of logical operations. Therefore, before we present our construction, it would be useful to recall the meaning of certain symbols in symbolic logic. As is well known, the primary and most fundamental principle of symbolic logic methods is P so also Q. That is the principle of implication when P and Q represent propositions, and inclusion when P and Q represent classes. In order to make the following exposition more precise, let us have P and Q stand for propositions, that is, products of an active judgment, although it would be just as legitimate to have them stand for classes. But if the sign of implication or inclusion, or in other words, if P and Q are taken to represent propositions or classes, the above inclusion formula expresses, in essence, one and the same fact. That is, that the truthfulness of Q is related to the truthfulness of P, and this fact is expressed by the words consequently, thus, ergo, etc. If P then Q, that is, if P then Q, or P ergo Q, this consequently or ergo, when developed, signifies that if P is true, then Q is also true, or if Q is false, P is also false, or P cannot be true if Q is false. Or finally, this expression is the preferred one because of its lack of ambiguity. Either P is false or Q is true. This last formula makes it possible to understand the equivalence of the operation of inclusion to the operation of logical addition. In fact, the combination of the symbols P and Q, that is, the operation of logical addition, signifies nothing else but the alternativity of the components P and Q. Either P is false or Q is true, or more simply, P or Q. From this, it is evident that it is possible to write the logical equation of two operations, namely, P if P then Q is the same as not P or Q, where the sign negative before P is the negation, or more precisely the negative of P. In general, the sign negative and minus in symbolic logic makes negative the symbol to which it is attached. Let us further recall that the sign then is the operator of logical multiplication, that is, that placed between two symbols or groups of symbols, it indicates the conjoint existence of these symbols or groups. Let us recall finally that the symbol V represents truth, veritas, while the inverted V, shows it, represents the negation of the truth, negative V, or falsehood. We now have all the data we need for the logical definition of the antinomy P and the expression of its schemes. Our reflections on antinomy naturally follow from that method of proof through the reduction to the absurd, which in mathematics was used by Euclid to prove the 12th proposition of the 9th book of the Principles, while in philosophy it was used by the dogmatists for the radical refutation of the arguments of the skeptics against the probability of the truth. Later on, too, this procedure was frequently used both by mathematicians and by philosophers, and it became widespread in society in general, serving the aims of the dialectics of the salon and home, as portrayed, for example, by Turgenev in the novel Rudin. But despite how widespread this method has been in practical application, it has been long neglected by the logical theory of inferences, and was pointed out only about 10 years ago by the champion of symbolic logic, G. Violati, of the school of Piano. However, neither the public that uses this method almost unconsciously, nor the philosophers and mathematicians who use it half-consciously, nor even Violati, who has understood it theoretically, saw its inadequacy for those goals toward which it has been applied in its connection with the theory of antinomy. In symbolic logic, this method is expressed by a very simple formula. Negative P or P so also P. If the negative of a proposition, that is, or of a class, implies the proposition that it negates, or the class, then it is true. Si négation d'une proposition implique cette proposition même, c'est vrai. Symbolic logic explains and justifies this paradoxical method of reasoning in effect according to Formula 3. But according to the principle of double negation, so the paradoxical method of reasoning, negative P or not P, so also P is the same as negative not P and P. But according to the principle of double negation, not P is the same as P. And hence, not P and P, or not P, so also P, if negative P, then P is the same as P and P. But it is clear that the alternative, P and P, that is P or P, entrains the irrefutable affirmation P so that P or P, so also P. And ergo, not P and P and P. This is crazy. Which is what one was required to prove. Such is the path indicated by symbolic logic. But is it sufficient? In other words, does Euclid's reasoning constitute a rigorous proof? Of course not. In order to become convinced of this, it is sufficient to represent not P through Q. Not P equals Q. It is then clear that there is no reason to exclude in advance the possibility also for Q of all that which was said in the foregoing about P, that is, to exclude the applicability of formula to Q. Thus, the possibility is not excluded that not Q or Q, so also Q. Or making corresponding substitutions from formula. Not P or negative P, so also negative P. Or finally by virtue of formula. P or negative P, so also negative P. So that one has provided not only P, but also not P. Thus, we have obtained two equally indubitable proofs which make up the antinomy P. Here then is the logical scheme of the antinomy P. Thesis P. One can suppose either the thesis P or its negation, the antithesis not P. In the first case there is no need to prove the thesis, while in the second case it turns out that from the antithesis one can once again derive the thesis, so that the following alternative is obtained, either the thesis or the thesis. The antithesis not P, one can suppose either the antithesis not P or its negation, the anti-thesis not P, that is the thesis P. In the first case, there is no need to prove the antithesis, while in the second case, it turns out that from the thesis one can once again derive the antithesis, so that the following alternative is obtained, either the antithesis or the antithesis. P or P, that is, the thesis P is affirmed. Symbolically, this can be expressed as thus, we directly affirm the thesis or negate it, and cannot in any case evade it. Thus, whether we let's see, the antithesis or the antithesis, not P or not P. The antithesis not P is affirmed. Symbolically, this can be expressed not P or not P, not P. Thus, whether we directly affirm the antithesis or negate it, we cannot, in any case, evade it. Using the methods and operations of pure logic, we have shown the possibility of antinomy in the strictest sense of the word. From this one must necessarily conclude, first of all, the insufficiency of the logical formula used to prove the thesis P if one does not exclude here the possibility of the formula. 9. And he's going from 4 to 9. In effect, the existence of the thesis in no wise guarantees the non-existence of the antithesis. So a non is not an anti. On the contrary, it always. An anti. A non is not automatically an anti. On the contrary, it always presupposes the existence of the antithesis in the domain of the spirit, and often presupposes it in other domains. In other words, each time it is necessary to become convinced not only of the truthfulness of the thesis P, but also to clarify whether it is not half of some antinomy P. Then the proposed process leads to the following symbolic definition of the antinomy. P equals P or not P, or V. Where V is the sign of truth, veritas, and the arch is the operator of logical multiplication, that is, the symbol of the coexistence of the terms between which it is placed. Translating the formula X into ordinary language, we can say an antinomy is a proposition which, being true, jointly contains thesis and antithesis, so that it is inaccessible to any objection. The addition of the symbol V, raising the antinomy above the plane of rationality, is precisely that which distinguishes P from falsehood, or the upside down V, lying in the rational plane and defined by the formula falsehood equals P and negative P. But what is this factor V in the definition of the antinomy? From the formal point of view, it is the result of a certain process which establishes in one way or another, in relation to P, that it is true, while the other two processes prove that this P in its structure is P and also not P. Therefore, for pure logic, V in the definition of P is only an indication of the position of this P, an indication of the relation that is required towards it. V is a finger pointing to the sky in the presence of P, so to speak, but it is not a constituent part of the structure of P itself. In its structure, P does not differ from the simple contradiction, falsehood, and hence, in the rational sphere, only authority is that finger which indicates the truthfulness of P in comparison with falsehood. That is why for Catholicism, immersed in the psychic and hence rational domain, but nevertheless having the spiritual and hence the antinomian as its object, authority is all. And without an iron authority, without the pointing finger of the Pope, a Catholic is powerless to live. One moment. To review, that is why for Catholicism, immersed in the psychic and hence rational domain, but nevertheless having the spiritual and hence the antinomian as its object, authority is all, and without an iron authority, without the pointing finger of the Pope, a Catholic is powerless to live. In the domain of the suprasensuous, and hence supra-rational, the factor V represents the constituent elements, the spiritual unity, the the suprasensuous reality of antinomy, and in the Holy Spirit this unity, this reality is experienced and perceived directly. For greater clarity, Formula 10 can be expanded to read, if not P, then P, or P, then not P, then P or not P, or falsehood or not falsehood equals P. That is, if the antithesis entrains the thesis, and at the same time the thesis entrains the antithesis, the combination of the thesis and antithesis, if it is not false, is an antinomy. Such is the formula of antinomy. All the antinomies disclosed in philosophy can be expressed with a greater or lesser degree of precision by this formula. Thus, truth is an antinomy. The term antinomy, as a philosophical term, is of very late origin, that is, it appears only with Kant, and that only in the Critique of Pure Reason, that is, in 1781. Till then it was a juridical and, to some extent, a theological term. But though the term antinomy is a late one, the very idea of the necessary self-contradictoriness of rationality connected now with this term is an old one. One can even assume that this idea first appeared as a simple reflection of the complex opposite, combining structure of the life of the ancient Greeks, both personal and social. Upon what is the superiority of the Greek mind based, asks one historian of Greek thought. The secret of its astonishing success, he answers, consists in a combination of opposites, an extraordinary richness of creative fantasy, along with an ever-vigilant doubt, inquisitive and daring everything, a powerful ability to make generalizations, combined with acute powers of observation, exploring all the peculiarities of a phenomenon, a religion that fully satisfies psychic needs without placing fetters on the mind that analyzes its creations. To this must be added a diversity of competing spiritual centers, a constant collision of forces, excluding the possibility of stagnation, and finally, a governmental organization and social structure sufficiently severe to restrain the wayward childish urges of the reckless and sufficiently free not to hinder the bold impulses of exceptional minds. In this combination of gifts and circumstances, one can perceive the source of the dominant success achieved by the Greek spirit in the domain of scientific study. How did the living perception of antinomy begin? In Asia Minor there lived someone whose mind had a tragic cast, and of the philosophers of antiquity he was perhaps the most sensitive to the truth. At least he was not subject to the inner staleness that too often deadens the soul of professional thinkers. For this reason his contemporaries call him Skotainos, the Dark One. His name was Heraclitus, and it was said that he spent his entire life lamenting the tragic nature of himself and of the world. This Heraclitus was the first to feel clearly that God the Word exists. He was the first to discover the higher harmony and supramundane unity of being. Attending not me but truth, he said, it is reasonable to recognize that all is one. Wisdom is one. Understand it to mean that reason which governs all through all. Reason for all is one and the same. And it was precisely this philosopher who was drawn to the untrembling heart of certain truth, as Parmenides said. It was this philosopher who all of his life spoke of the separatedness, fragmentedness, and antinomicalness of our earthly lot. Having discovered the perfect harmony of the Word, he saw with all possible acuteness, from one living before Christ, the inner discord of the world. Subsequently, this has happened more than once, and even Spinoza's spiders and Spinoza's joy upon hearing rumors of war could be attributed to the contemplation of one's substance. It is possible that even the Apostle Paul expresses the same pious and ecstatic feeling, though in a purified and spiritualized form, when in the Epistle to the Romans he contemplates from the height of eternity the blindness of the Hebrew nation. But in the Christian before Christ, this new perception of dualism between the lower and higher was still more acute, for it was wholly unreconciled. People should know, he exclaims, that war is ubiquitous and that truth is discord, for everything arises and everything is annihilated because of discord. War is the progenitor and master of everything. People, unreasonable people, is it not over you that the philosopher lamented his entire life? People do not understand in what way opposites agree. Like the string of a bow or lyre which is tightened or released, the world's harmony consists in a combination of tension and release. Counteraction brings things close to each other. Out of opposites, perfect harmony is formed. Everything arises thanks to discord. Therefore, unite the whole and the unwhole, the harmonious and the inharmonious. All gives one, and one gives all. For God, everything is beauty, good, and justice. For people, one thing is just, another thing is not. The world is tragically beautiful in its fragmentedness. Its harmony is in its disharmony. Its unity is in its discord. Such is the paradoxical teaching of Heraclitus, later paradoxically developed by Friedrich Nietzsche in The Theory of Tragic Optimism. And the fundamental tone of Heraclitus' moods, their sap and color, is perfectly expressed by a fragment consisting of a single word: contradiction. Contradiction. One desires to repeat after Heraclitus his lament, a lament that has not lost its acuteness even today. Contradiction. One desires to repeat after Heraclitus his lament, a lament that has not lost its acuteness even today. People do not understand this eternally existent truth before they hear of it. They do not even understand it when they hear of it for the first time. For although everything occurs according to this truth, people turn out to be uncomprehending. When in experience they find speeches and facts such as I expound them. Read Aghibasi. Contradiction. Aghibasi. Understanding every phenomenon according to its nature and explaining it in essence. What they do when they are awake slips away from some people, just as they forget what they do in their dreams. The glorious names of the Eleatics must be placed after Heraclitus in the history of the idea of antimony. According to the Eleatics, rationality becomes entangled in insuperable contradictions as soon as it desires to become completely attached to this egotistically fragmented world, a world fragmented in time and in space. But what was said by the Eleatics is too well known for us to repeat here. A great proponent of the antinomicalness of rationality, though he is still not understood in this aspect, was Plato. The majority of his dialogues are nothing but a gigantic antinomy, developed with all care and artistically dramatized. Plato's very predilection for the dialogue form of exposition, that is, the form of the contraposition of convictions, already hints at the antinomic nature of his thinking. But this antinomic nature becomes even more palpable if we take into account the fact that nearly every one of the dialogues only sharpens the contradiction and deepens the abyss between yes and no, between thesis and antithesis, but by no means decides the question one way or another, or the other. One of two things holds. This is either a very good antinomism, or a very unsuccessful philosophy of integral rationality. Finally, among the profound and creatively powerful representatives of antinomism, we must include Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa with his doctrine of coincidentia oppositorum, that is, the coincidence in God of opposite determinations. This doctrine found a distinctive and multivalent symbolic expression and his application of mathematics to theology, which unfortunately has not been studied and is almost unknown to historians of thought. As far as other thinkers are concerned, for example Hegel, Fichte, Schelling, Renouvier, and others, one scarcely has to mention them. They are sufficiently well known. Finally, the name of the contemporary pragmatists can also be inscribed in the golden plaque of the history of antinomianism. Knowledge of contradiction and love of contradiction, along with ancient skepticism, appear to be the highest achievement of antiquity. We dare not, cover contradiction over with the paste of our philosophemes. Let contradiction remain as profound as it is, if the knowable world is cracked, and if in practice we cannot repair its cracks, neither must we hide them. If the knowing reason is fragmented, if it is not a monolithic slab, if it is self-contradictory, again we must not pretend that this is not the case. The impotent exertion of human rationality to reconcile contradictions should have been repulsed long ago by a bold acceptance of contradictoriness. The book of Job wholly consists of such a concentrated experience of contradiction. This book is wholly constructed on the idea of antinomicalness. Here God reminds us that man is not the measure of creation, that the universe is designed according to a plan which infinitely surpasses human reason. The desires and works of God are essentially incomprehensible to man and therefore appear to him unreasonable. See Job 23. We cannot find him out. He respecteth not any that are wise of heart. Job 37, 23 and 24. Everything is a mystery, says one of Dostoevsky's characters. God's mystery is in everything. The heart feels frightened and amazed, and this fright gives joy to the heart. It is even more beautiful that it is a mystery. The mystery of moral disorder amazes Job with its magnificence, but his friends do not even notice it. See Job 21. Lay your hand upon your mouth. Job 21:5. This is a gesture of silence and mystery, the very same gesture with which John the seer of mysteries is often painted on icons. The mysteries of religion are not secrets that one must not reveal. They are not the passwords of conspirators, but inexpressible, unutterable, indescribable experiences, in italics, which cannot be put into words except in the form of contradictions, which are yes and no at the same time. They are mysteries that transcend meaning. That is why when it is expressed in church hymns, the rapture of the soul is inevitably enveloped in the shell of a distinctive play of concepts. The whole liturgy, especially the canons and stichera, is full of this ceaselessly exuberant wit of antithetic juxtapositions and antinomic affirmations. Contradiction. It is always a mystery of the soul, a mystery of prayer and love. The closer one is to God, the more distinct are the contradictions. In heavenly Jerusalem, there are no contradictions. Here on earth, there are contradictions in everything, and they can be removed neither by social reorganization nor by philosophical argument. Something great, long desired but wholly unexpected, the great unexpected joy, will come suddenly. It will embrace and shake the entire sphere of earthly being. It will roll the heavens up like a scroll, wash the earth, give new powers, renew everything, transubstantiate everything, or just say transfigure everything, and show the most simple and everyday things in an all-blinding radiance of effulgent beauty. Then there will be no contradictions and no rationality tormented by contradictions. But now the brighter is the truth of the radiant light shown by Christ and reflected in the righteous, the light in which the contradiction of the present age is overcome by love and glory. The blacker will be the cracks of the world, cracks in everything, but I wish to speak of cracks in the domain of speculation. In heaven there is only the one truth, but here on earth We have a multitude of truths, fragments of the truth, non-congruent to one another. In the history of the shallow and boring thought of modern philosophy, Kant had the boldness to utter the great word antinomy, which violated the decorum of the apparent unity. For this alone he would have merited eternal glory. It does not matter if his own antinomies are unsuccessful. What is important is the experience of antinomicalness. Synthetic a priori judgments. From the point of view of dogmatics, antinomies are inevitable. If sin exists, and the first half of faith is in the recognition that it does in fact exist, then our entire being, just like the whole world, is fragmented, taking as our starting point one corner of the world of our own rational mind. We have no reason to expect that we will get the same result we would have gotten if we had started from another corner. A meeting is improbable. The existence of a multitude of dissonant schemes and theories, which are equally conscientious but proceed from different starting points, is the best proof that there are cracks in the world. Reason itself is fragmented and split, and only the purified God-bearing mind of saintly ascetics is somewhat more whole. In this mind, the healing of the fissures and cracks has begun. The sickness of being is being cured. The wounds of the world are being healed. For this mind itself is the healing organ of the world. Plato's Hippias complains to Socrates, "You and your friends, with whom you are in the habit of conversing, do not view things in their entirety, but break off and grind what is beautiful, and all other things fragmenting them in your speeches. It is for this reason that such beautiful and intrinsically integral bodies of being slip away from you." But that which the naive Hippias sees as a personal drawback of Socrates is in fact a necessary feature of science and as an activity of the rational mind. Whatever we take, we inevitably fragment the object we are considering, split it into incompatible aspects. When we look at one and the same thing from different points of view, that is, when we operate in different modes of spiritual activity, we can arrive at antinomies, at propositions that are incompatible in our rational mind. These contradictions are eliminated in the mind only at moments of illumination by grace. But they are eliminated not rationally but supra-rationally. Antinomicalness does not say either the one or the other is not true. It also does not say neither the one nor the other is true. It only says both the one and the other are true, but each in its own way. Reconciliation and unity are higher than rationality. Antinomicalness comes from the fragmentedness of being itself, including rationality as a part of being. As the ideal limit where contradiction is removed, we place dogma. But for rationality, dogma is only formal. Dogma is filled with the sap of life and becomes self-proving truth only when the soul is filled with grace. Though it is a regulative norm for rationality, dogma is intuitively given truth for the grace-purified reason that receives revelation. For rationality, dogma is not more than a categorical imperative that proclaims the demand: you must think in such a way that every violation of a dogma in one direction is immediately neutralized by a corresponding violation in the opposite direction. All your rational operations on a dogma must be carried out in such a way that they preserve the fundamental antinomy of the dogma. By contrast, for reason purified by prayer and ascesis, the limiting case of which is a saint's reason, dogma is a self-proving axiom which testifies, you see both my truthfulness and the inner necessity for me to be antinomic in rationality. If now you see unclearly, you will see clearly later when you purify yourself. As an object of faith, a dogma inevitably contains a rational antinomy. If there is no antinomy, then rationally the proposition has an integral character. But then, first of all, this is not a dogma but a scientific proposition. There is nothing to believe here. There is no reason for purification and ascesis. But to me it seems a great blasphemy to think that religious truth, holiness, can be apprehended in the case of any inner state without ascesis. To be sure, religious truth can shine its rays of grace upon an impure reason in order to attract it, but such truth cannot be accessible to everyone. Thus, I repeat, such a proposition is not a dogma. Secondly, the consciousness then is not full, not deep, has not looked into the inner heart of the object, for we cannot integrally think the essence of a religious object, do not have the power to embrace it rationally without decomposing it. Rationality must necessarily limit itself to one of the sides of an object, and limitation to one side is precisely the meaning of heresy. A heresy, even a mystical one, is a rational one-sidedness that claims to be everything. The Greek word airesis means choice, tendency, a disposition to something. Then it means what is chosen, a chosen mode of thought, and finally a party, sect, or philosophical school. This word contains the idea of one-sidedness, of some sort of rectilinear concentration or on one of many possible affirmations. Orthodoxy has a universal nature, but heresy essentially has a sectarian nature. The spirit of a sect is the egoism that emanates from it, spiritual separateness. A one-sided proposition takes the place of absolute truth, and such a proposition thus excludes everything in which it is seen the antinomic complement to the given half of the antinomy, rationally incomprehensible. An object of religion, in falling from the heaven of spiritual experience into the fleshliness of rationality, inevitably splits apart into aspects that exclude one another. The task of an orthodox, universal rationality is to collect all the fragments, their fullness, while the task of a heretical sectarian rationality is to choose the fragments that please one. You need many strings to play on the psaltery of eternity. As we have said, for rationality, fullness and unity or integral fullness is only postulated, but the condition of the intuitive givenness of a postulate is the taming of one's rational activity and the going out into the thinking, full of grace, restored, purified, and recreated human nature. Christ gave the seed of the new creation, the seed of God, 1 John 3:9, and the fixed point of the immovable rock on which we stand, saving ourselves from epoche. Withdrawal. But connected fullness is only a hope. It will be given only by the one who will wash all the filth from creation, by the Holy Spirit. Dogmas are comprehended by the Spirit, in whom is the fullness of understanding. But for the time being, the more profound and fuller is the experience, the more acute and diverse will the antinomies of faith be. Indeed, the Holy Scripture is full of antinomies. Not only do the judgments of different biblical authors, justification by faith in the Apostle Paul and justification by works in the Apostle James and so on, intersect antinomically. But this is even the case for the same author, not only in different writings, but even in the same writing, not only in different passages, but even in the same passage. Antinomies stand side by side, sometimes in a single verse. They are found in the most powerful passages, where they shake the soul of a believer like the rushing wind and strike the high places of the mind like lightning. Only genuine religious experience apprehends antinomies and sees how their reconciliation is possible. But for positivistic rationality they are not visible, or their paradoxicality appears to be the literary manner of a sick mind. Consider the Apostle Paul. His brilliant religious dialectic consists of a series of discontinuities. It jumps from one affirmation to another, where each successive affirmation is antinomic with respect to the preceding one. Sometimes an antinomy is even embodied in a stylistic discontinuity of exposition and an external asyndeton. Rationally contradictory and mutually exclusive judgments have their sharp edges directed against each other. But for direct perception, these virgin blocks of yes and no that are piled on top of one another reveal a higher religious unity, a unity that is capable of achieving its culmination in the Holy Spirit. What inner insensitivity and what religious tastelessness it would be to reduce all these yeses and nos to a single plane, to consider the one layer or another inessential. Antinomies belong to the very essence of experience. They are inseparable from experience the way the color of a petal is inseparable from the pigment contained in it. This can be compared to mist painted on a picture, to a design woven into a fabric. If we wish to see the picture more clearly, if we wish to make the fabric smooth, it would make no sense to erase the mist or to eliminate the design. Together with them, we would destroy the very substance of the picture or the fabric. We would destroy the picture or the fabric itself. It is the same way in religion. Antinomies are the constituent elements of religion, if we conceive it rationally. Thesis and antithesis, as warp and woof, bind the very fabric of religious experience. Where there is no antinomy, there is no faith. But this will be only when faith and hope vanish away and only love remains. See 1 Corinthians 13, 8 through 13. How cold and distant, how godless and stale seems to me now that time of my life when I consider the antinomies of religion resolvable, but not yet resolved, when in my proud madness I affirmed the logical monism of religion. Self-renunciation is the only thing that brings us close to godlikeness, but both self-renunciation in general and the self-renunciation of rationality in particular are an absurdity for rationality. A cannot be not A, impossible but certain. From I love makes not I. For true love lies in the rejection of rationality. I have spoken enough about antinomies in general. Let me present several concrete examples from an uncountable multitude. Paul's antinomies are the first to strike the eyes, and for a very simple reason. In Paul, the profundity of theosophical speculations is combined with a dialectical form, whereas in other sacred writers the form is somewhat aphoristic or, on the other hand, systematic. The rational mind is not predisposed to expect connectedness here, and therefore does not at once notice contradictions behind the aphoristic disjointedness, but a dialectical exposition predisposes the rational mind to expect connectedness, and when the connectedness is disrupted by a salient point at which thesis and antithesis converge, the rational mind involuntarily shudders. This clearly means that it is required to sacrifice itself. For us, the most appropriate epistle is the most dialectical and fiery one, namely Romans, this antinomy-charged bursting bomb against the rational mind. Here, by way of example, is a table of antinomies chosen. In a rather haphazard fashion, I deliberately exclude certain antinomies that I intend to examine in a future book. Example of dogmatic antinomies: divinity, thesis, consubstantial, antithesis, trihypostatic. Two natures are united in Christ. Thesis, as unmerged and unchanging. Antithesis, as indivisible and inseparable. Relation of man to God. Thesis, predestination. Romans 9, where the rejection of Israel is explained from the objective and theological point of view, that is, the economic point of view, that is, an answer is given to the question, for what reason? Antithesis, free will. Romans 9:30 through 10:21, where the rejection of Israel is explained from the moral and anthropological point of view, that is, from the hamartiological point of view, that is, an answer is given to the question, why? Thesis, through the fall of Adam, that is, as a chance phenomenon in the flesh, Romans 5:12 through 21. Antithesis through the finitude of the flesh, that is, as necessarily inherent in it. 1 Corinthians 15. Judgment. Thesis. Christ as the judge of all Christians during his second coming. Romans 2:16, 14:10, 1 Corinthians 3:13, 2 Corinthians 5:10. Antithesis. God is finally judging all people through Christ. 1 Corinthians 4:5, 15, 24, and 25. Retribution. Thesis. Retribution applied to all according to their works. Romans 2:6-10, 2 Corinthians 5:10. Antithesis. Free forgiveness of the redeemed. Romans 4:4, 9:11, 11:6. Final fate. Thesis. Universal restoration and bliss. Romans 8:19-23, 11:30-36. Antithesis. The double end. Romans 2:5-12. Perdition. 2 Corinthians 2:15 and elsewhere. Deserts. Thesis. The necessity of the works of asceticism. 1 Corinthians 9:24. So run that ye may obtain. Antithesis. The lack of necessity of works of asceticism. Romans 9:16. So then it, mercy, is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. Thesis. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Philippians 2:12. Antithesis. For it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his pleasure. Philippians 2:13. Thesis. See, the soul of the Lord desired freely, but it desired freely that which, antithesis, it should have desired according to the will of his Father. From John of Damascus, precise exposition of the Orthodox faith, 3:18. Grace. Thesis. Where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. Romans 5:20. Whosoever abideth in him, Christ, sinneth not. 1 John 3:6. Whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin. 1 John 3:9. Antithesis. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. Romans 6:1-2. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. 1 John 1:8. Faith. Thesis. Is free and depends on the free will of man. St. John 3:16-28. Antithesis. Is God's gift and is not found in human will, but in the will of the Father, who draws us to Christ. St. John 6:44. The coming of Christ. Thesis. To judge the world. For judgment I come into this world. John 9:39. Antithesis. Not to judge the world. I came not to judge the world. John 12:47. And we'll begin letter 7 next. Sin. The epigraphy of Kronos. Sumiet rodit. He eats away at his own. Thank you.
Предложенных честных даре, Господу помолимся. Господи, помилуй. О святем храме сем, и с верою, благоговением и страхом Божиим ходящий конь, Господу помолимся. Господи, помилуй. О, избавитесь нам от всякие скорби, гнева и нужды, Господу помолимся. нас, Боже, Твоею благодатью.